It is said that the instant you become a mother, your entire world is transformed. My own did as well, but not for the reasons I had anticipated. Marcus did not weep, smile, or reach for our newborn son upon his first sight. He simply stared and he stated, "We require a DNA test immediately." The chamber was devoid of sound. He then added with the most casual grin, "He's too good-looking to be mine." It appeared as though the room had been evacuated of its atmosphere. I was seated in my hospital bed, clutching our neonate Liam mere hours after giving birth. I was unable to breathe for a brief period. I instinctively clung to him with my arms. His complexion was still slightly pink and soft. Near his cheek, his diminutive digits formed a fist. He made a slight cooing noise, oblivious of the silence that followed his father's words. Initially, I found it amusing, because what else can one do when the man they have been married to for 4 years says something so preposterous, but no one else seems to have chimed in. One of the nurses chuckled awkwardly, more out of discomfort than mirth. My mother, who had been perusing her phone in close proximity to the window, abruptly became tense. "Marcus," I replied, endeavoring to maintain a casual tone. "What are you even discussing?" He refrained from laughing. He stood with his arms crossed, gazing at Liam as if he were attempting to solve a conundrum. His eyes narrowed slightly, and that foolish grin persisted on his visage. He shrugged, those eyes, that hair, that little jawline dimple. "I am merely stating this. I mean, come on, it is impossible for him to have inherited all the beneficial traits." The implication caused my cheekbones to flush, rather than the compliment. My chest contracted, as if a rope were gradually tightening around my lungs. I attempted to chuckle once more, but the laughter was insufficient. "Why are you so serious? Do you really want to take a test?" Marcus approached the bed and stooped to observe Liam. To ensure that we were not questioning the paternity of our newborn son, he said, as if we were discussing the oil being checked in a vehicle. I experienced a gradual sensation of heat ascending my neck. I cradled Liam closer to my bosom as I shifted him in my arms, causing my hands to tremble. In that instant, his warmth was the sole source of stability for me. I observed my mother rise from her chair, her arms folded tightly across her bosom. From the corner of my eye, into a narrow line, her mouth was compressed. She did not utter a word, but I was able to interpret her thoughts precisely. She never fully trusted Marcus, and perhaps at that moment neither did I. I gazed at my spouse, the individual who maintained my hand during each appointment, who painted the nursery a pale green color and informed me that we would name our son after his grandfather, and I perceived an entirely different individual. An individual who is suspicious, chilly, and detached. He repeated the statement with a sigh, as if it were a trivial matter. However, it was a significant event, as everything assumed a new, distinct quality. The room, the pleasure, and even Liam's gentle breathing were all diminished by the shadow he had cast. What was the cause of the immense pain his remarks caused? Was I insufficient? Did he not have faith in me? I was not yet in possession of the answers, but I was aware of one thing. The moment should have been beautiful. However, it was the commencement of an event that I had not anticipated. Everything changed as a result of Marcus's comment, not only in the chamber but also within me. It would be reasonable to assume that your sole concern would be the baby after giving delivery, becoming enamored with them with each glance, memorizing their diminutive size, and counting their fingers and toes. However, I was unable to cease contemplating Marcus and the statements he made. We were then discharged 2 days later. In order to provide assistance, my mother insisted on residing with us for an extended period. However, I was aware that she did not have confidence in Marcus interacting with me unilaterally. I informed her that she was being overly dramatic. She refrained from engaging in a debate. She presented me with that expression, her lips pursed and her eyes aglow with apprehension. Marcus, conversely, maintained an air of normalcy. He did not mention the DNA test again, not even once. He changed diapers, made jokes, and even took selfies with Liam for Instagram, writing captions such as, "Already got my mini-me." I endeavored to relinquish the memory, persuading myself that it was a foolish jest that was delivered at the most inopportune time. However, a quiet, gnawing anguish had begun to emanate from within me, the kind that you can't physically locate but you can feel in your bones. The comment was not the sole issue. It was the manner in which he occasionally regarded Liam, as if he was attempting to ascertain his intentions. One evening, I observed him standing over the bassinet, gazing intently. He was unaware that I was observing him. He was seeking for something he couldn't quite find, as evidenced by his squinted eyes and furrowed brow. Upon entering the room, he experienced a slight shock and responded with a chuckle. He inquired as to when he would begin to resemble me. I smiled, but his demeanor caused my epidermis to tingle. Subsequently, minor incidents transpired, which I might have overlooked had I not already been agitated. One afternoon, a nurse from the hospital, Rachel, contacted me to inform me that they were conducting a routine follow-up. Although her tone was cordial, I am certain that I detected an unusual hesitation when she inquired about Liam's hospital ID number. I presented it to her, and she briefly contemplated the situation before confirming that everything was satisfactory. I inquired as to whether there was an issue. She declined, however. The manner in which she articulated her refusal was unsatisfactory. Late that evening, I reviewed Liam's hospital records and observed an unusual circumstance. One of the digits on the wristband that was attached to him at birth was incorrect. A single digit, possibly a typo. However, once you begin to harbor doubts, it is impossible to cease. For hours, I conducted a search on the internet for neonate ID errors. I stumbled upon a rabbit tunnel that I had never intended to explore. Marcus was ultimately presented with the information. "Are you currently being sincere?" He expressed his amusement. "You were the one who was angry with me for even suggesting that something was amiss, and now you are behaving as though the infant may not be ours." I attempted to dispute, but he persisted. "Sophie, you are fatigued. You have recently delivered a child. Your hormone levels are inconsistent. Refrain from allowing this to affect your thoughts." He kissed my forehead and proceeded to depart, leaving me with a handful of medical documents and a head full of uncertainty. It is possible that he was correct. However, why was I unable to dispel the notion that something was amiss, despite the fact that everything was in order? I developed an obsession with verifying information. Ancient ultrasound records, photos, the bracelet, and his birth certificate. I transformed into an individual I did not recognize, a mother with an infant in one arm and a browser history brimming with dire scenarios in the other. I was hesitant to accept Marcus's assertion that the examination was serious. However, I was now deeply uncertain as to whether or not his inquiry was incorrect, and this caused me to feel apprehensive. Marcus revisited the matter several days later. He did not do it during a confrontation, or with even the slightest indication of wrath. He casually mentioned it over coffee, as if he were discussing a dentist appointment. He stated, "I discovered a private clinic that offers same-day DNA testing," while sipping from his mug. Reliable and discreet. His words caused me to squint, uncertain as to whether I had comprehended them accurately. "Are you still working on that?" When he glanced up, his eyes were composed, but they were too composed and controlled. "I believe it will provide us both with a sense of tranquility." "Both?" I refrained from responding immediately. I gazed down at Liam, who was curled up on my bosom, his tiny lips twitching in a dream. He was so serene and flawless. The notion that anyone would query him, including his own father, was insulting. However, concurrently I had been asking myself questions, hadn't I? Marcus gazed at him in the darkness as if he were attempting to solve a conundrum, the nurse's peculiar tone, and the incorrect ID number. I murmured, still gazing at Liam, "I believed you were joking when you said that." Marcus shrugged, partially in jest but truly soft. "Wouldn't it be beneficial for you as well? You have been exhibiting an unusual level of anxiety." Although he was not mistaken, his demeanor appeared to be lacking in concern and strategic planning, almost as if he had already composed a narrative and was anticipating my arrival. I was unable to fall asleep that evening. I continued to observe Marcus from the corner of my eye, not because I believed he would cause Liam harm, but rather because I came to the realization that I no longer knew him, or perhaps I never did. I contacted the hospital the following morning. I informed them that I had a few inquiries regarding Liam's birth records. After conversing with the woman, I was transferred to another individual, who in turn transferred me to another individual. I was ultimately connected to a hospital administrator named Ellen, who appeared to be circumspect. After a brief delay, she stated, "Everything appears to be in order on our end. A healthy baby male was born at 3:42 a.m., without any complications. However, I pointed out that his bracelet was 1 digit off from mine. She responded promptly, but her response was premature. Since that time, we have implemented modifications to our labeling system." She interrupted me before I could inquire further. "If you require printed documentation, it is recommended that you consult with patient records." The phone remained in my possession for an extended period of time. It appeared as though everyone desired for this to vanish, as if they could ignore it for an extended period of time, it would eventually vanish. I sifted through Marcus's old belongings, including his documents and high school yearbooks, on the same day. I pretended to be inquisitive, but in reality, I was seeking something that would either validate or eliminate my apprehension. However, there were gaps in the collection. No baby photographs, no childhood mementos, and only a few adult IDs and his college diploma, which I later discovered did not even include a middle name. I had never previously observed that, or perhaps I never considered it. Subsequently, when I inquired about it, he laughed. "When I was a child, all of that was consumed by fire. Do you recall?" "Yes, I informed you of that." Had he? I was unable to recall. Every inconsistency suddenly felt like a thread, and it is difficult to stop once you begin to tug. Nevertheless, I consented to the DNA test, not because I was convinced that Liam was not ours, but because I required evidence of Marcus's identity, rather than Liam's. Naturally, I refrained from uttering that statement aloud. I simply agreed and replied, "Okay." Marcus exhaled in relief the moment I did. That was the instant I came to the realization that he was not apprehensive about the information we might uncover. He was concerned that I would cease to inquire. The DNA test was scheduled for Thursday. Marcus conducted the entire process, including contacting the clinic, completing the necessary paperwork, and even transporting us to the location as if it were a routine family errand. His demeanor was excessively tranquil. In the interim, I experienced a sensation that my chest was encased in barbed wire, which caused it to contract with each glance at him. Liam was seated in the rear of the vehicle, gazing upwards at the ceiling and kicking his diminutive socks off once more. He was the sole individual in the vehicle who appeared to be at ease. I harbored feelings of envy toward him. Marcus's and Liam's samples were submitted, and we were informed that the results would be available within 5 business days. Marcus made a joke on his way out, stating that he is 80% angel and 20% mischief. However, I was unable to hear him. My thoughts were already in a state of disarray. 5 days to remain in this state of limbo, with the knowledge that my spouse believed our son might not be his, and the realization that I no longer had a clear understanding of his identity. I was unable to fall asleep that evening. Marcus was dozing off beside me as I pretended to browse through my phone in bed. However, my consciousness refused to cease. I was unable to shake the memory of his fire story, which recounted the loss of childhood mementos. It appeared to be rehearsed and expedient. What was the reason for my inability to recall him ever relating this information? The following morning, I returned to the hospital independently after dropping Liam off with my mother. I informed them that I had abandoned a small blanket with Liam's name embroidered on it. Complete fabrication. However, it enabled me to navigate past the front desk and into the obstetrics department. I experienced a sudden burst of hope and dread upon observing Nurse Rachel, who appeared uneasy following the delivery. Her recognition of me was immediate. "Sophie, correct?" She replied with a gentle smile. "What is the condition of the diminutive individual?" I responded favorably. "However, I have a peculiar inquiry." I informed her of the mismatched bracelet, the incorrect digit, and the follow-up call. I anticipated that she would dismiss it. However, her complexion became paler. She glanced around and said, "I should not say anything." However, we identified a potential disparity that evening, albeit briefly. A malfunction in the system resulted in the display of 2 infants under your ID number. However, the issue was resolved. Management informed us that the issue was a system error and advised us to proceed. I perceived the sensation of blood evaporating from my visage. Was Liam ever removed from the room without my presence? I inquired. Rachel halted. "Yes, for a routine inspection. However, this should be conducted in a brief manner." "How long is briefly?" She declined to respond. I expressed my gratitude to her, but I was inert and left the hospital in a daze. As I held the steering wheel, my hands were trembling. My esophagus was parched. The phrase "2 babies under your ID" reverberated in my mind like a siren. Marcus was unable to ascertain the information I had acquired. Not yet. I required additional information. Consequently, I initiated an investigation into Marcus's background, utilizing social media and online archives to gather as much information as possible. I even conducted a search of public record databases, an activity that I had never anticipated undertaking in my lifetime. It was as though I had transformed into a detective in my own marriage. However, as I continued to examine the situation, the specifics became increasingly hazy. Nothing remains of his high school graduation. No photos that were tagged prior to 2012. Strangely, I was unable to locate a single individual online who had shared a memory of him prior to his undergraduate years, not even a childhood friend. Marcus appeared to have been born at the age of 21. I felt my stomach twist as I gazed at a vacant profile photo from an old college alumni page. I had consented to a DNA test in order to establish that Liam was ours. However, I was uncertain as to which prospect frightened me more: the possibility that our son was not his, or the increasing apprehension that Marcus was not who he claimed to be. An early Wednesday morning telephone communication was received. I was in my nightgown, rocking Liam in one arm while standing in the kitchen when my phone rang. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number. I nearly declined to respond. Part of me froze, but I recovered. "Who is Mrs. Evans?" "This is Dr. Graham from Greenbrook Medical," said the voice in a placid, clipped tone. "We require that you and your spouse visit our office today to engage in a face-to-face conversation regarding the results of your paternity test." I inquired in person, my throat becoming parched. "Indeed, it is imperative." My stomach plummeted. I was incapable of communicating. I simply nodded, as if he were able to perceive me. Marcus did not inquire when I informed him. He simply uttered, "Finally," and retrieved his keys. It was a tranquil journey to the clinic. Liam was once again oblivious to the tempest that was raging around him, as he was sound asleep in his car seat. My heart was pounding as I gazed out the window, attempting to regulate my respiration. A nurse directed us to a small private office at the clinic. The interior was sterile and frigid, as if the warmth had been intentionally extracted. My nerves were pounded by the deafening ticking of a digital clock on the wall, which occurred every second. Afterward, Dr. Graham entered the room. He was middle-aged, with a no-nonsense demeanor and graying temples. He sat across from us, opened a file, and paused for an extended period of time, causing my thorax to contract. "I will be straightforward," he declared. "The results have been received, and they are exceedingly uncommon." The warmth and authenticity of Liam's presence in my arms, my anchor, were abruptly brought to my attention as I tightened my grip on him. "Sophie dear." Graham initially examined me. "Marcus is not biologically related to this infant." I did not even flinch. I was already aware of this in some way. However, he then turned to Marcus. His eyes remained fixed for an excessive amount of time. Something crossed his visage: hesitation and perhaps even terror. He continued, and Marcus' voice is now quieter. "You are not a biological match for this child. However, the most significant aspect is that your DNA does not correspond to any records associated with the ID you submitted." Marcus remained motionless. I gazed at him, anticipating some form of denial, bewilderment, or something similar. However, his visage remained stationary, without a single flutter. The folder was closed by Dr. Graham. We conducted a cross-check of our internal system: your name, your date of birth, and even your photograph. A federal alert was initiated as a result of all of this. The sensation of having my blood run chilly was palpable. I inquired, my voice scarcely rising above a whisper, What are you saying, dear? Graham declined to respond. He retrieved the telephone from his desk, depressed a button, and uttered a single word that will remain etched in my memory: security. We require your urgent presence in room 4. Time ceased to exist. Marcus' eyes flickered with dread, and for the first time in my acquaintance, I observed it briefly. Afterward it vanished. What is happening? I exhaled. Marcus stood. He abruptly exclaimed, "This is absurd. Do you believe that I am a swindle artist? However, Dr. Graham did not hesitate. We are aware, we do not contemplate. David Langston was the individual to whom your DNA was identical. In 2014, the individual was apprehended and disappeared shortly after posting parole. The subsequent year, Marcus Evans, the genuine Marcus Evans, passed away in a car accident. We are uncertain as to the duration of time you have been residing under his name." I was unable to exhale. The room shook violently. The man I married, the father of my child, and the man I believed to love was not even real. Marcus, or David, gazed at me with a sense of melancholy as 2 uniformed officers entered the room. Perhaps for a brief period, he had a desire to assume the identity of another individual. Suddenly they removed him from my life, Liam's life, and the deception in which we were living. I did not cry immediately, not even when they handcuffed him, when the door slammed behind him, or when Dr. Graham handed me the printed DNA results, as if it were a definitive confirmation that none of this had been a dream. I simply sat there numb, holding Liam close to my bosom, his tiny head resting under my chin, as if he were the only genuine thing in the world. The days that followed were akin to traversing water. Everything experienced a deceleration. The atmosphere was oppressive. As soon as the story was published in the local news, reporters attempted to contact me. A man residing under a stolen identity, assuming the roles of a spouse and father. They described it as a peculiar paternity case with a criminal element. I loathed that phrase. This was not a narrative. This was the duration of my existence. It was discovered that David, Marcus, or whatever his true name was, had been assuming multiple identities for years in order to evade debt, legal charges, and even allegations of fraud in another state. He was not a physically violent individual. However, the betrayal was more profound than any injury could ever be. What type of individual fabricates their entire existence solely to be with another individual? Furthermore, what type of individual becomes a father while engaging in that deception? I was unable to cease blaming myself for a period of time. I walked through every memory, birthday, laugh, and I love you with him, attempting to identify the cracks, clues, and signs that I had overlooked. However, the truth is that individuals such as him are adept at feigning, adept at taking on the precise persona that is required of them. However, the most profound realization stunned me. Liam was mine. I had anticipated the worst, that he had been switched and that I had inadvertently returned home with the incorrect infant. However, the hospital verified the information that Nurse Rachel had attempted to convey to me following the investigation. A system malfunction or a misunderstanding had occurred. However, it was resolved prior to our discharge. Liam was never absent from my side for an extended period of time. From the instant he took his first breath, he was mine. Nevertheless, David had exploited that flaw in a peculiar manner. He cultivated doubt, capitalized on the confusion, and compelled me to query everything in order to prevent me from questioning him. He was clever, cruel, and calculated. It took me weeks to pronounce his name aloud, and it took me even longer to cease referring to him as Marcus in my own thoughts. Presently, Liam and I are the sole individuals. Angela, we temporarily relocated to my mother's residence, and she never once uttered the phrase, "I told you so." When I eventually allowed myself to cry, she simply held me. She cradles Liam as if he were the entirety of the universe, which is precisely how I perceive him. I submitted an application for annulment. It was unexpected that there were no legal complications. It is impossible to remain wedded to an individual who has never existed. Occasionally, I continue to receive correspondence addressed to Marcus. I discard it without opening it. At other times, I reflect on the man I believe to be my lover in the late hours of the night when Liam is asleep and the house is silent. The version of him who sat with me during 3 a.m. feedings, painted the nursery a delicate green color, and kissed my forehead before each doctor's appointment. Was that a genuine event? Or was that simply a component of the fabrication? I am uncertain. It is possible that I will never do so. However, I am aware of this. Occasionally, the truth is not merely painful. It uproots you, compelling you to reconstruct your identity in the absence of the individual you had anticipated. In the midst of that tumultuous, agonizing reconstruction, you discover something more resilient. You discover your identity. Liam was the individual I encountered in my situation. Additionally, this is sufficient. I am grateful for your attention to my narrative. If you have ever found yourself questioning your relationships, reality, or even your own intuition, please know that you are not alone. The most difficult truths occasionally inspire us to become our most resilient selves. Please consider liking this narrative if it resonated with you, evoked an emotional response, or served as a reminder to rely on your intuition.